In this particular video lecture, we are going to discuss a topic and questions based on that topic, which is my favorite topic, VFR on top. I personally, whenever I flew, I never practiced this, never did VFR on top maneuver or VFR on top flight. But I like this concept of VFR on top, and I like to read about it, to watch videos of YouTube about this particular VFR on top uh, flights. So that's why I have selected this topic, and I have picked some questions based on this topic related to this topic, and we are going to understand this particular concept, which is often very much which is often neglected, and we are going to answer the questions, answer to those questions, find the reasons for that answers, etc. So let's start with today's question number one. Where are VFR on top operations prohibited? Okay. So before doing this, we will read some basic information on VFR on top. Now, what is VFR on top? There are two things: VFR on top and VFR over the top. So first, let's focus our attention on VFR on top. Pilots on IFR flight plans operating in VFR weather conditions may request VFR on top in lieu of or instead of an assigned altitude. So basically, you have filed an IFR flight plan, you have IFR rating, filed an IFR flight plan, and you are flying in IFR according to IFR regulations, IFR altitudes, IFR clearances. You're getting ATC control services, everything with respect to IFR. But there happens to be a good weather conditions at the altitude you're flying. Let's say you may be flying at 15,000 feet. Nevertheless, the visibility conditions, the distances from cloud are adequate, and you want to fly VFR now. Okay, or it maybe you're flying at 15,000 feet. You're flying at 15,000 feet. You are surrounded by clouds, and if you come to know that of 60 at 16,000 feet or any other altitude above you or below you, there are sufficient visibility conditions or sufficient VFR conditions with respect to visibility, distance from clouds, etc. And you determine to fly VFR without cancelling your IFR flight plan. That is, this concept or this situation is called VFR on top. So pilot or IFR flight plans operating in VFR weather conditions may request VFR on top instead of flying at an IFR assigned altitude. Next point, this permits them to select an altitude of flight level of their choice, subject to any ATC restriction. If ATC doesn't restrict you, you can select any altitude of your choice, any level of your choice, and fly it there. Or if there is any restriction, adhere to that restriction while you execute your choice. That is another point. This can be helpful if you are slightly above or in between layers and you want to stay out of the clouds. Flying for extended period of times through solid IMC conditions can be fatiguing and the view isn't nearly as good. Staying out of the clouds can make your passengers more comfortable too. There is typically less turbulence when you are in VMC conditions. There is no doubt a better view and it helps your passengers avoid air sickness. A maintained VFR on top clearance doesn't restrict you to operating only above an IMC layer either. The clearance permits operations above the IMC conditions, below the IMC conditions, or between IMC conditions, between two cloud layers, or in areas where there is no meteorological obstruction. Okay, so VFR on top. That doesn't mean you have to be on top of an IFR assigned altitude. You can be below that assigned IFR altitude or between two IFR conditions, meaning two cloud layers, anything. Okay, so this is the basic information on VFR on top. So here you can see there is a cloud layer below you, cloud layer above you. You are flying between them, so this becomes your VFR on top flight. Okay, flight maneuver. So where are VFR on top operations prohibited? So VFR on top operations are prohibited in Class A airspace. Okay, they are permitted off airways. You don't want to fly on a particular VOR radial while tracking from point A to point B. You want to fly off that radial, away from that radial. You want to do area navigation direct point A to B. That's fine. So VFR on top is allowed there. When flying through Class B airspace, Class B, Class C airspaces are also controlled airspaces. Nevertheless, VFR on top clearances are granted in those airspaces. But in Class A airspace, no VFR on top. Okay. Next, when you are flying on an IFR flight plan, a VFR on top clearance comes with a few stipulations. You must fly, so you must remember these points. First point, you must fly at an appropriate VFR altitude as prescribed, right? So you are on IFR flight plan. As long as you are on an IFR flight plan, you will be given IFR altitudes, IFR assigned altitudes. Okay. Now, when you select to fly according to VFR on top condition, you will change your level, change your level, flight level altitude from that of IFR to that applicable to VFR. Okay, so you will fly a VFR assigned altitude based on semicircular system. Okay, so VFR on top, so VFR altitude. You cancel VFR on top clearance, you come back to your original IFR assigned altitude or a newly assigned IFR altitude. Next, point two, you must comply with VFR visibility and distance from cloud criteria prescribed. When you have accepted VFR on top clearance, you must comply with all VFR visibility and distance from cloud criteria. You must comply with IFR regulations. Okay, just because you have accepted VFR on top clearance doesn't doesn't free you or doesn't absolve you from complying with IFR regulations. While you are on VFR on top clearance, you are also bound to follow any other restrictions or any other regulations which are pertaining to IFR, like maintaining an altitude above minimum en route altitude, minimum vectoring altitude, like that. Okay, so you must also comply with IFR regulations. That means you must adhere to minimum IFR altitudes, your ATC clearances, position reporting, radio comms, course to be flown, etc. You should advise ATC before any altitude change when operating VFR on top. This ensures ATC can provide traffic information and separation. VFR on top is not permitted in Class A airspace. VFR on top is not permitted in Class A airspace. Next, question number two. When can a VFR on top clearance be assigned by ATC? What are the conditions that are to be met before ATC assigns you this particular clearance? Only upon request of the pilot when conditions are indicated to be suitable. Anytime suitable conditions exist, ATC wishes to expedite traffic flow. When VFR conditions exist, but there is a layer of clouds below minimum en route altitude. So the correct option is option A. VFR on top clearance will be assigned when pilot requests for it and conditions are suitable, meaning there are VFR conditions outside. Which ATC clearance should instrument-rated pilots request in order to climb through a cloud layer or an area of reduced visibility and then continue the flight VFR? Okay, so you're climbing through IMC conditions. After emanating from those IMC conditions, coming out of those conditions, now you have found yourself in a good position, good visibility conditions, good distances away from the clouds. So in such scenario, you can request VFR on top clearance. You can request VFR on top clearance and you can fly between the cloud layers or above a cloud layer or below a cloud layer. Okay. Next, special VFR to VFR over the top. Now, special VFR clearance, requires you to be clear of cloud, right? So you cannot fly through a cloud layer with a special VFR clearance. So that is wrong. Option C is also wrong because VFR over the top is different from VFR on top. How? Read this. It's easy to confuse VFR on top with VFR over the top. A VFR on top clearance is an IFR clearance that allows pilots to fly at VFR altitude simple. On the other hand, VFR over the top is an operation where you maintain VFR cloud clearance while operating on top of an overcast layer. On top of an overcast layer. This usually happens when departure and destination airports have good weather conditions, but there is a low level overcast cloud between point A and point B. You can depart, climb, cruise, descend in VFR along your route, even while IFR conditions may be present at lower altitudes. Okay, so this such a situation is called VFR over the top. There is good weather at your airport. There is a good weather at your destination airport. There is also good weather along the route, but along the route at low levels, there is bad visibility conditions or overcast cloud layer. So it translates to flying over that overcast layer. So that's why the name is given VFR over the top. Okay, next. When on a VFR on top clearance, the cruising altitude is based on magnetic course. Very important. All your semicircular rule, all altitudes based on semicircular rule are based on magnetic forces, not magnetic heading, not through course, not through heading. It's magnetic force. Next, in which airspace is VFR on top operation prohibited? Okay, in which airspace VFR prohibited? It is class alpha airspace. Class B allowed. Class E if you want to fly off route, off the airway route, that is also okay. Next, what cruising altitude is appropriate for VFR on top on a westbound flight below 18,000 feet? So, what does the semicircular rule say? In an eastbound flight, that is flight between 000 to 179, your VFR altitudes are odd thousands plus 500 feet. 179 is an odd number, so odd plus 5, odd plus 500. If it's a westbound flight, the semicircular rule says that is starting from 180 to 359er, the VFR cruising altitudes will be even plus 500, right? 360, 180 is an even number, so even plus 500. So the correct option here will be option Bravo, but remember, before choosing a VFR on top altitude, make sure you do not go below minimum en route altitude, okay, minimum IFR altitude. So this should be in your consideration while deciding VFR on top cruising altitude. Okay, next. Which rules apply to the pilot in command when operating on a VFR on top clearance? So we both VFR and IFR rules apply. You must comply with VFR conditions, VFR regulations, as well as IFR regulations. So, uh, uh, looking at this, the flying accepting VFR on top clearance is an additional burden or responsibility because again your workload increases. You must remember VFR regs, follow those regulations. Remember IFR rules, follow that also. Okay, so this is an addition to your workload. Question 8. What minimums must be considered in selecting an altitude when operating with a VFR on top clearance? So, what minimum? So, like I said, if you are considering to accept a VFR on top clearance, you must fly at a VFR altitude, VFR cruising altitude. Okay, so that VFR cruising altitude will be based on semicircular system, and you must also consider minimum en route altitude for that portion of flight. You should be above that minimum en route altitude. So correct option will be option Charlie. Minimum IFR altitude, minimum distance from clouds, visibility appropriate to your altitude selected. These three conditions will influence your decision making as to VFR on top altitude. Okay, selecting VFR on top altitude. Okay, so very important question. With this, we come to the end of this short lecture, but very fruitful, significant lecture. I hope you have understood all the concepts I have explained today, understood the things that I have told you, learned something new today, most important. And I urge you all to practice these questions again. Read, read widely on this topic in Wikipedia, YouTube. You will gain more knowledge. It will be very, very beneficial to you all. Subscribe to this channel. Forget not to share this video with your friends and like this video lecture. I thank you for your time. All the best. I'll see you in the next lecture.